As Rachel Carter passed the town sign, her hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. Welcome to Eldridge Hills, where peace lives. Peace, something she hadn't felt in months. Now, in a new town, a new home, and a new beginning, she was determined to find it. In the back seat, her 8-year-old daughter Emily stared out the window, but her eyes reflected thoughts more than scenery. Rachel glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Are you ready?" she asked. Emily gave a small nod, pressing her lips together. She didn't say yes or no, but Rachel knew the answer. "I'm not ready, but I'll try." Their new house was small, 2 stories, with a white-painted wooden porch. It looked just like the others on the street, but to Rachel, that ordinariness felt like relief. As the key slid into the lock, she paused and gently took her daughter's hand. Emily looked down, her eyes fixed on the steps, as if asking, "Is this what Mom will now call home?" Inside, the house was quiet. The scent of fresh paint still hung in the air. Moving boxes were scattered everywhere. Rachel first showed Emily her room. "This one's yours. We can put up posters if you'd like." Emily sat at the edge of the bed. "I don't know anyone here." Rachel smiled. "Me neither." They looked at each other in silence for a moment. Then Rachel sat beside her, wrapping her arm around Emily's shoulder. "People we don't know become familiar over time, just like when I met your dad." Emily looked away. The sting of the divorce was still fresh. That evening, surrounded by pizza boxes, Rachel tried to keep the mood light. She pointed to the tree in the backyard. "We could hang a swing there." Emily's eyes lit up for the first time. "Really?" "If you help me build it, okay," Emily said, a small smile spreading across her face. To Rachel, that smile was a step forward. Later that night, Rachel brushed Emily's hair and asked, "Are you ready for school?" Still lying under the covers, Emily gave a quiet, But her body spoke more than her words. Rachel saw it. As her daughter's eyelids began to droop, she wrapped her in a soft hug. "Tomorrow's going to be great," she whispered. The next morning, as Rachel set the breakfast table, Emily entered the kitchen without a word. She sat down and stirred her cereal absent-mindedly. The spoon never reached her mouth. Rachel noticed. "Nervous?" Emily shrugged. Rachel didn't press. As they were about to leave, Rachel held up 2 new hair clips. "Which one do you want to wear, the heart or the butterfly?" Emily shook her head. "I don't want to. I don't want people to look at me." Rachel paused. Was this ordinary childhood shyness, or something more? She looked into her daughter's eyes, but found no answer. As the school bus turned the corner, Rachel felt a slight weight in her chest. The big yellow vehicle came into view. Children waited cheerfully. Emily took a step back. When the door opened, she locked eyes with the driver, Mr. Grayson. Late 60s, gray hair, glasses, broad shoulders. He didn't smile, but he wasn't cold either. His expression was neutral. "Good morning," Rachel said with a small wave. Mr. Grayson nodded. "Morning." Emily took a few steps toward the bus and reached the first step. Then she stopped. She turned around and looked at her mother. This time, Emily's eyes were deep. She just looked, as if wanting to say something but unable to. Rachel, silently, "Do you want to tell me something, sweetheart?" But she couldn't bring the words to her lips. Emily turned back and stepped onto the bus. Rachel stood still, watching as it drove away. A faint uneasiness crept into her chest. She wasn't sure why. Was it the weight of a new beginning, or the first whisper of something her instincts had already started to hear? That night, Rachel sat up late, staring blankly at the scattered boxes in the middle of the living room. Emily was in bed, but Rachel wasn't sure she was actually asleep. She couldn't bring herself to go to her own bed either. Getting used to a new home wasn't easy, but tonight felt far from simply difficult. There was an unease inside her that she couldn't describe. Everything in the house was in its place, and yet it felt like nothing truly was. Throughout the night, Emily tossed and turned in her room. After Rachel had finally fallen into a short sleep towards dawn, she woke again to the sound of her daughter's footsteps. Emily went to the bathroom and then into the kitchen for a glass of water. It was all done quietly, but the storm inside her echoed louder than those footsteps ever could. In the morning, Rachel made an omelet for Emily. "Sweetheart, are you excited?" she asked. Emily first dipped her spoon into the food, then replied, "A little." There was a muffled tone in her voice that Rachel recognized well. There was no sparkle in her eyes that morning, no childlike curiosity. Rachel's mind drifted back to a few days earlier. Before the move, they had visited the school. While Rachel went inside to drop off the registration papers, Emily had stayed in the courtyard. She was sitting on a bench that overlooked the parking lot. At that time, a bus driver was sitting on the bench nearby smoking a cigarette. Behind his glasses, he looked straight at Emily. He hadn't smiled. He hadn't said anything. But Emily had quickly turned her head and stood up. When Rachel came back outside, she hadn't noticed anything, but now, remembering that moment, a knot formed in her throat. Her daughter's instincts had been triggered in that exact moment. It was a wordless encounter, but her intuition had already begun to sound the alarm. Emily's, "Do I have to go to school tomorrow?" came from that look. Children don't always sense danger through words. They feel it in energy. That morning, when the school bus turned the corner, Rachel walked her daughter to the door. Emily hadn't worn her hair clips. She didn't even want to use the cute little backpack they had picked out for school. She didn't want attention. She preferred to be invisible. The yellow bus, driven by Mr. Grayson, approached slowly. The door opened. Rachel and the driver locked eyes. There was something in him that Rachel couldn't define. No smile, no greeting, just emptiness. Emily stopped a few steps before the door. Rachel knelt down to meet her eye level. "Sweetheart, everything's okay, all right?" Emily nodded, but Rachel noticed this wasn't a nod that meant yes. It was the kind that meant, "I just want to get this over with." "If you don't want to take the bus, I can drive you," Rachel offered. Emily lowered her head. "No, everyone takes the bus." "Then let's try just for today. You can tell me all about it tonight, okay?" Emily glanced at her mom from the corner of her eye, then slowly stepped onto the bus. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling inside her. When Emily sat by the window, her eyes didn't follow the road. They were fixed on her knees. As the bus pulled away, a voice inside Rachel said, "Something's wrong." Rachel tried to work that day, but her mind kept returning to Emily. In the afternoon, when the school bus returned, Rachel rushed to the window. Emily stepped off the bus. The other children walked cheerfully, but she was silent. Even her footsteps were hesitant. She entered the house, took off her shoes slowly, and went straight to her room without saying hi to her mother. Rachel was surprised. "Sweetheart, how was school?" No response. A while later, Rachel went into her room. Emily was lying silently on the bed. "How was today?" Emily whispered from beneath the blanket. "It was fine." "Did you make any friends?" "Yes." "What's your teacher like?" "She's nice." "And the bus?" Emily didn't respond for a few seconds. Then, "I don't know." "What do you mean, you don't know?" "I'm tired." Rachel understood. The conversation was closed. That night, Emily went to bed late again. Before retreating to her room, she snacked on something in the kitchen. Rachel didn't try to talk. She just observed. There was something inside her daughter, something buried, and Rachel, with a mother's intuition, knew whatever it was, it had to come out before it grew. But for now, there was nothing concrete, only silence. And silence doesn't always mean peace. Emily's silence was saying more than words could each passing day. First, her appetite faded. Then, her gaze changed. Rachel noticed the sparkle in her daughter's eyes slowly beginning to fade. It was as if something inside her was retreating. being pulled away into a place unseen. And Rachel's instincts told her that unseen place was not safe at all. That afternoon, when Emily came home from school, she changed her clothes, dropped her backpack, and went straight to her room. She didn't close the door, but somehow Rachel found that voluntary silence even more unsettling. About 20 minutes later, she walked in. Emily was sitting at her desk with a small sketchbook open in front of her. She was drawing a bus. Thick yellow lines, shaded in gray. In one window, a tiny figure of a girl could just barely be seen. In the back row, behind the glass, a shadow loomed. Rachel looked closely at the drawing. "What's this, sweetheart?" "The school bus." "That's you, isn't it?" Emily nodded. "And who's in the back?" No answer. Emily started playing with her pencil between her fingers. Rachel swallowed. "Is everything okay at school?" Emily gave a slight nod, but it wasn't a yes. It was more like, "I don't want to talk." Rachel decided not to push further, but that evening, while organizing Emily's backpack, she found more drawings tucked into the back pages of the notebook. There were shapes on the pages, some clear, others distorted. The lines twisted and spiraled out of control. On one page there was a bus seat, beneath it a figure drawn in black. The head wasn't fully detailed, as if the face had been purposely left blank. On another page, a little girl sat by the window looking out, and outside the glass, there was a large, dark, face-shaped silhouette. On the last page, in Emily's own handwriting, were the words, "If I don't make a sound, would anyone still see me?" Rachel's hands trembled. She closed the notebook, but the questions in her head refused to be shut away. The next morning, as Rachel helped Emily onto the school bus, she made a different decision. She would get into her car and follow the bus from a distance. She needed to see with her own eyes where Mr. Grayson went and how he behaved. Before stepping onto the bus, Emily turned to her mother. That look, it was there again, quiet but heavy, as if to say, "Please stay." Once Emily was on the bus, Rachel got into her car and began to follow at a distance. The bus picked up kids as usual. Some were laughing, others stared out the window, but Emily didn't look outside. She stared at her shoes. Just before turning onto the school road, the bus made an unexpected stop on a side street. Rachel kept watching from afar. The bus waited for a few minutes. She couldn't see what was happening inside, but the pause didn't feel normal. Then the bus moved again. At the school entrance, students got off one by one. Emily was the last to exit. Mr. Grayson said something. Emily lowered her head and walked away in silence. Rachel thought about that scene all day. That evening, Emily didn't eat dinner. She just stared at her plate. "Did your teacher ask you to come up to the board today?" Rachel asked. "Yes." "What did you talk about?" "I don't know. I don't remember." The sentences were short, cut off. The entire conversation felt defensive, like a wall. That night, Rachel stood at the edge of Emily's door. Her daughter was sitting on the bed, holding a pencil, sketching something into the notebook on her lap. When Rachel stepped inside, Emily quickly closed the notebook. "You're still awake? Soon. Do you want to read a book together?" Emily shook her head. "If you don't want to take the bus tomorrow, I can drive you," Rachel said. "No, it's okay." "Why not?" "Because it's supposed to be this way." "What do you mean?" No answer. As Rachel lay down that night, her concern was no longer just a vague feeling. This was a signal, and Rachel was finally starting to see it. Emily's silence had started to press against Rachel's chest like weight. It wasn't the lack of words that exhausted her. It was the emptiness behind her daughter's gaze. Every mother carries an invisible radar. They understand some things without needing words. Rachel felt it now. She knew her daughter was afraid of something. She just didn't know what name it carried yet. That morning, Emily grabbed her bag, put on her coat, and froze in front of the door. She was squeezing her fingers together. Rachel watched her, saying nothing. "Did you forget something?" Emily shook her head. "No. If you don't want to go, I have to." "Who said that?" Emily didn't answer. Rachel knelt down to her level. "Sweetheart, you can tell me, no matter what it is." Emily looked away, then lowered her head slightly and whispered, "I'm scared." Rachel's heart tightened. "What are you afraid of?" But Emily didn't reply. She opened the door and walked toward the bus before it had fully stopped. Mr. Grayson nodded toward a seat. Emily boarded without saying a word. That day, Rachel tried to work, but couldn't. Her laptop screen glowed, untouched, but her eyes stared into empty space. Emily's sketchbook was on the table. She hadn't dared open it in days, but now she couldn't resist. She opened the book. New pages showed a world shaded in black and gray. Faceless people. Silent children looking out from windows. A large school bus drawn in thick strokes. The windshield marked with sharp, crisscrossed lines. And on the very last page, a tiny figure, clearly Emily, looking out the bus window. Beneath it, only 2 words. "I'm locked in." Rachel knew in that moment. Watching was no longer enough. It was time to act. That afternoon, Rachel started researching the school bus system in the area. There was an email form where parents could report concerns about drivers, but it couldn't be submitted anonymously. There were no security cameras on the buses. Children's safety was entirely left to the character of supposedly trusted drivers. Rachel found nothing officially negative about Mr. Grayson, but that didn't ease her mind. The next morning, Emily left her breakfast half-eaten. Rachel quietly followed her and slipped a small recording device into her backpack. A tiny digital piece, light enough to go unnoticed. At the door, she said, "When you get home today, I want you to tell me everything." Emily paused. "If I tell you, will something happen?" Rachel hesitated. "What kind of something?" "I don't know, but it feels like it would." Rachel knelt again. "No matter what happens, I'm here for you. No one can hurt you." Emily narrowed her eyes. "But he scares me." "Who?" Emily bit her lip. "The one on the bus." "Mr. Grayson?" Rachel was just about to ask when the bus rounded the corner. Emily immediately turned and began to walk. Rachel's words died in her throat. At 2 p.m., Rachel sat down and picked up the recorder. Her finger trembled as she pressed play. The first few minutes were quiet. Children murmuring in the background. The sound of windows rattling. Then Mr. Grayson's voice came through. "You were quiet again today, Emily. Wish all kids were as silent as you. If you stay quiet, everything goes smoothly. If you don't make noise, everyone likes you." Rachel nearly dropped the device. The sentences weren't direct threats, but there was a threat inside them. In the tone, the pauses, the word choices. It was a psychological trap for a child. That evening, Rachel watched Emily closely without showing it. She was still quiet, but something had changed. As if a small weight had been lifted. Maybe because she spoke. Or maybe because someone had finally heard her. While Rachel was doing dishes in sweatpants, Emily suddenly came up beside her. "Today, I got scared, but I'm supposed to tell, right?" Rachel turned off the faucet. "Telling means you're brave for showing your fear. It doesn't mean you're not afraid." Emily nodded. "Then I'll be brave." Rachel knelt and hugged her daughter. "You already are." But in Rachel's heart, another voice whispered, "This is just the beginning." And silence would never again be accepted as an answer. That morning, when Rachel came down to the kitchen, she wasn't looking at the world through a mother's eyes, but through a detective's. The house was quiet, but the thoughts in her mind roared in her ears. She sat at the table, notebook in hand. The tip of the pen hovered in midair. What she needed to write wasn't just what she had heard. It was what she had felt. And her instincts weren't whispering anymore. They were screaming. She got up from her chair and went straight to the cupboard. From an old box up high, she pulled out a small mini camera. It was a leftover from an old vlog channel. She hadn't used it in years. But now, it was about to serve its most important purpose. She carefully placed it inside Emily's backpack, hiding the wires so they wouldn't show. Inside, she left a note. "This camera is only to protect you. You don't have to speak, just show." While Emily ate breakfast, she was quiet, but it wasn't the usual kind of silence. Her eyes lingered longer on her mother's. In those glances, there was something new, the quiet trust that comes from being heard. Rachel leaned down. "You don't have to talk after the bus today, just feel." Emily lowered her head, a slight nod that meant, "Okay." When the bus arrived, Mr. Grayson opened the door as always. But this time, Rachel didn't look away. They locked eyes. "Good morning," she said, her tone short and cold. Grayson nodded. Behind his glasses, his stare was blank, or at least meant to appear that way. That day, Rachel couldn't sit at her desk. Every minute was haunted by what the recording might reveal. She kept one eye on the street until late afternoon. When the yellow bus finally turned onto their block, her heart began to race. Emily got off. Her face didn't carry its usual blankness. But this wasn't relief either. It was the calm of someone who knows the danger isn't over yet. Rachel brought her inside. "Is there anything you want to tell me today?" Emily shook her head. "Okay," Rachel said. "Then I won't speak for you today, but I will watch." When she connected the camera to the computer, the first scenes were ordinary. Children getting on. Chatter, whispers along the way. Then the camera shifted slightly to the left. Emily was recording out the window. And then Mr. Grayson's voice came through, muffled at first, then clearer. "There used to be kids in this neighborhood who talked too much. Not anymore. You're good at staying quiet, Emily." A pause. A whisper followed. "I know how easy it is for kids like you to be forgotten." Rachel's eyes widened at the sentence. She swallowed hard. This wasn't just a personal threat. It echoed like a statement from a system. Kids like you. This wasn't aimed just at Emily. It was aimed at who she was, at what she represented. Rachel couldn't sleep that night. She listened to the audio over and over, dissected every phrase. In her mind, she was building a file. Date, April 14th. Audio, kids like you. Video, approaches. When she's alone on the bus, she now had fears that had turned into evidence. And once fear becomes documented, it can reach others too. The next morning, Rachel decided to speak to the neighbors. There were a few families nearby whose children rode the same bus. She knocked on doors. The first, "Oh, honey, Mr. Grayson's been here for years, clean record, no one's ever complained." The second, "What are you talking about? Your daughter's new here. You people always come in with problems." The third, they locked eyes with Rachel. Something changed in the woman's expression. "We also had some issues, but it's not easy to talk about. The kids stayed quiet, and so did we." Rachel realized in that moment she wasn't alone, but she also saw that Mr. Grayson wasn't the only obstacle. She was facing a community that had gotten used to silence. That evening, Emily wasn't drawing. She sat at the edge of the kitchen table watching her mother. Rachel was holding a folder, scribbling notes onto paper. "Who are you going to show those to?" Emily asked. Rachel didn't answer. "Who would believe you?" Rachel knelt down, took Emily's hand. "At first, it'll just be you and me who believe. Then someone else. Then someone else, and finally, everyone." Emily smiled for the first time. When Rachel woke up that morning, a decision was already waiting in the kitchen. The recordings from yesterday had begun to mean something, not just in her heart, but in the real world too. But this time, it wasn't only about how she felt. It was about whether those feelings could now become proof. As she poured coffee into her mug, her eyes drifted toward Emily's backpack. The camera was still inside. But today, she would remove it. Because it was no longer time to record, it was time to speak. Rachel walked straight into the police station, the file gripped tightly in her hands. She approached the officer on duty. "I'd like to file a report," she said. The officer glanced at her. "About what?" "A school bus driver." "What did he do?" Rachel hesitated. "Psychological pressure, and I suspect there may be more." "Do you have anything concrete? Audio, video, a witness?" The officer straightened in his seat. "Name?" "Grayson. Mr. Grayson." Suddenly, something shifted in the room. The officer disappeared into the back. 2 minutes later, another uniformed officer stepped out, this one with a more serious demeanor. "Come with me, please," he said. Rachel played the footage. The officer watched carefully. He listened to each sentence, rewound, played again. "That's his voice?" "Yes." "And this is your child?" "Yes. Emily." "There's no physical abuse or contact in these recordings." "No, but there's fear. And as you said, targeted language." The officer removed his glasses and took a deep breath. "Would you be willing for us to speak with your daughter directly?" Rachel paused for a moment. "We need to ask her if she wants to." That evening, Rachel told Emily about the police. The girl's eyes widened slightly. "Will they punish me?" "No, they just want to understand." Emily turned back to her bed and stared at the ceiling. Talking. It's hard with words. "You don't have to talk. I'll be there with you." "Will they believe me?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "I believed you, and now I'm not the only one." The next day, Emily met with a female detective trained in child psychology. Rachel waited outside. She didn't go in, but something on the waiting room wall caught her attention. A small framed quote. "Some people tell stories by shouting, some with a whisper, but most just by looking." Rachel lowered her head. She remembered the eye drawings in Emily's sketchbook. The sentence she had written, "If you can't hear me, please look." The interview lasted 45 minutes. When Emily came out, she wrapped her arms around her mother. "I told them," she said softly. "What did you say?" "How I felt. And they told me what things aren't normal." Rachel hugged her tightly. "You're so brave." The next day, things erupted at school. An official investigation had been launched into Mr. Grayson. But the surprising part wasn't the size of the issue. It was the lack of reaction. The school principal avoided making any statements. Some teachers looked at Rachel coldly. Whispers began circulating around the neighborhood. One neighbor, walking past their house, called out directly to Rachel. "Your daughter's a bit sensitive, isn't she?" Rachel smiled. "No, she's just honest." But the real surprise came that evening. There was a knock at the door. Standing there was a woman Rachel didn't know, her eyes full of tears. My son takes the same bus. He started acting strangely months ago, but he never said why. I heard about what happened to your daughter, and today I talked to him. He said the same things happened to him." Rachel lowered her head. The woman's voice trembled. "I stayed silent, but I won't anymore." And in that moment, Rachel realized something vital. This was no longer just Emily's story. When the police launched the investigation, Rachel had assumed something would change, but the reality was far more complicated. Yes, Emily's story was now part of an official legal process. But the outside world's response to that process was not as clear, not as supportive, nor as open as she'd hoped. That morning, Rachel stood at the window with her coffee and felt that something about the silence on the street had changed. But it wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of distance. Neighbors, who used to greet her with a cheerful "good morning," now looked down as they passed, clutching their children's hands tightly. Curtains were quietly drawn whenever someone walked by her house. As a mother, she had gone to war, but the enemy wasn't just one man. It was a system, a neighborhood culture, and a structure that saw silence as comfort. That morning, as Rachel walked Emily to school, she nearly bumped into another mother with a child. The woman avoided eye contact and muttered, "You're the one stirring up the neighborhood, aren't you?" Rachel didn't reply. What could she say? If protecting a child is what you call stirring things up, then yes, I am. But the words stayed in her throat. She gripped Emily's hand tighter and walked her all the way to the classroom door. Later that day, an email came from the school. All school bus drivers will now have one-on-one meetings with parents. On the surface, it seemed like progress. But Rachel knew better. This wasn't about accountability, it was about damage control. Then her phone rang. It was the woman who had come to her door a few days earlier. "I need to tell you something," she said. That evening, Rachel went to her house. The small living room was lined with family photos. The woman sat rubbing her hands together, struggling to find the right words. "My son's been riding that bus for years. He's always been quiet. We thought it was just shyness, but..." She paused, then added, "A few months ago, he came home crying. He said someone on the bus told him, 'You sit here too much. Real kids sit in the back.' We didn't think much of it at the time. Now, everything makes more sense." Rachel bowed her head. This wasn't just Emily's voice. It was the voice of many unseen children, and those voices had been suppressed for years. The next day, after picking Emily up from school, Rachel turned to her. "Other kids went through things like you, Emily." Emily's eyes widened. "But no one said anything. Because they were scared, just like you. But now they're starting to speak." Emily paused. "So I'm not alone?" Rachel shook her head. "You never were. But now, people are finally starting to see that." For the first time, Emily smiled with confidence. "Do you think other kids draw like I do?" Rachel nodded. "Yes, and maybe now, they won't even need to." But the fight Rachel was in wasn't just against individuals. It was against official walls, too. The school announced that Mr. Grayson had been placed on leave. That meant he hadn't been fired. He could come back. Rachel knew this was a temporary fix. If the system didn't change, people like Grayson would just return, with different names. So she decided to go bigger. She started writing in local parent forums, on social media, and in the town's community newspapers. In every post, she emphasized one thing. "This isn't just something that happened to my child. This is the silent scream of all the children we've failed to hear. This isn't a school issue. This is a community problem." A few days later, people began to gather outside Rachel's house. A handful of women, 2 young men, one with a stroller. They all had notebooks in hand. "We want to talk too. Something's been eating at me for years. My daughter used to be so quiet. Now I understand why." Rachel welcomed them in. Her living room transformed into a place of testimony. Silence gave way to words, and words began breaking chains. Rachel sat alone at the kitchen table. In front of her were scattered notes, printed transcripts of audio recordings, photocopies of drawings, and witness statements. But the most striking thing on the table was an open email. From local district attorney's office. Subject: request for interview regarding Emily Carter's testimony. Rachel read the lines over and over. The words didn't change, but the meaning grew heavier each time. Emily might be the only one who could illuminate the truth in all this darkness, but to place that responsibility on a child, it was perhaps the heaviest decision a mother could make. That evening, Rachel sat down with Emily, turned off the main lights. Only the warm glow of the lamp filled the room. "Sweetheart," she began, "I have to ask you something." Emily looked up at her mother. "The DA's office wants to speak with you. It's going to be kind of formal. They want you to tell the truth." Emily remained silent. She lowered her head and twisted the edge of her blanket between her fingers. "Will they believe me?" Rachel leaned in and took her daughter's hands. "Before they can believe, they have to hear you, and your voice is stronger than you think." Emily nodded. "I'm scared." "I am too," Rachel whispered, "but we'll do it together." The day of the interview arrived. Rachel helped Emily put on her favorite hair clip, a small purple flower. When Emily looked in the mirror, there was fear in her face, yes, but also a kind of readiness. When they entered the district attorney's building, even the security procedures felt intimidating. Emily's small footsteps echoed down the hallway. Eventually, they were met by a child advocate. "We're just going to have a chat," the woman said with a gentle smile. "There are even toys in the room." Rachel waited outside. She sat with her hands folded on her knees, eyes closed. She silently repeated a prayer. Let her just be herself. Let her speak in her own voice. That's enough. The interview lasted about 40 minutes. When Emily came out, there was no dramatic expression on her face, but her eyes weren't empty either. "Is it over?" she asked. Rachel leaned forward. "I don't know if I said everything," Emily added. "Did you say what you felt?" Rachel asked. "Yes." "Then that's enough." Within a few days, the DA's office responded. An official complaint had been filed against Mr. Grayson, not solely based on Emily's testimony, but also supported by the case file Rachel had built through other witness accounts. The news made it into the local paper under a small headline: "A school bus driver accused of psychological intimidation. Investigation deepens." But Rachel could feel how insufficient the words were again. Psychological intimidation. But what about silent threats, racially charged implications? Could any of that truly be captured in a few clinical words? As the story spread, so did the support. Messages poured in from across the town. Some thanked her. Some shared their own stories. "My son used that bus too. We moved. I didn't understand back then. I wish I could have been as brave as you. We stayed silent for years. You became the voice we needed." Rachel realized that a wall had finally cracked, but it didn't happen on its own. That crack was opened by Emily's drawings, Rachel's refusal to stay silent, and a mother's relentless persistence. As for Emily, she was changing. She was drawing more. She played music in her room. She spoke a few more words each day after school. One afternoon, as Rachel was hanging laundry in the kitchen, Emily came in quietly and said, "If I have to speak again in court, I will." Rachel turned. "Why?" Emily shrugged gently. "Because I don't feel alone anymore." Rachel pulled her daughter into her arms. Tears streamed silently down her face. These weren't tears of fear. They were tears of healing. When the court date was set, Rachel couldn't sleep for days. Every morning she walked Emily to school, not watching the buses anymore, but scanning faces. Because by now, the threat wasn't just Mr. Grayson. It was the town's quiet judgment that weighed down on them. The town had split in two. One side: "This child is just sensitive. It's all being blown out of proportion." The other: "We've silenced a darkness that's walked among us for years." Rachel's name started appearing in the newspapers. At first in small columns, then under headlines that caught national attention. 8-year-old's silent testimony divides town. School bus driver trial. When does silence become complicity? Rachel had suddenly transformed from a mother into a public figure confronting a broken system. But she had only one concern, not speaking into microphones, but protecting her daughter. As the court date approached, the prosecutor informed her that Emily's testimony would be presented via video. Emily wouldn't have to enter the courtroom. Rachel felt both relief and heartbreak. Yes, the decision protected her child, but it also revealed something deeper, that the community wasn't ready to look into a child's eyes and face the truth. That morning, as they arrived at the courthouse, Rachel held her folder tight. Emily walked silently beside her, clutching a small toy. Inside, the crowd, cameras, and reporters were overwhelming. Rachel hadn't prepared for any of this. But she knew one thing. The pain in her daughter's eyes no longer belonged to just the two of them. In the courtroom, Rachel and Emily sat in the front row. When the video began, the entire room fell silent. Emily's voice filled the screen. Mr. Grayson's words. His gaze. The loneliness on that school bus. I thought if I stayed quiet, everything would be okay, she said. The courtroom stirred. Breaths, whispers. Some jury members shifted in their seats. Others looked away. The voice of a child. It could cut through adult silence with piercing force. Mr. Grayson sat in the courtroom, dressed in a gray suit, upright and unreadable. His lawyer responded, "These are just interpretations." There was no physical contact. The driver's words are taken out of context. But Rachel stood. She asked to speak. "Your Honor," she began. "A child writing, 'I'm locked in here' in her notebook. That is context. A mother saying goodbye every morning with a scream caught in her chest. That is context. Dozens of children whispering the same story in different forms. That is context. You may not call it evidence, but we call it lived experience." Silence fell. This time, not the silence of dismissal, but of recognition. At the end of the day, the hearing concluded. No verdict was given. The judge requested further witness testimony from the prosecution. It meant the case would be extended. But to Rachel, that wasn't a setback. It was an opening. Because now, more people were beginning to speak. That very evening, someone knocked on Rachel's door again. This time, it was an elderly couple. "Our grandson used to ride that bus," the man said. "We never really made sense of a few things. But today, we understand. We may be late, but late is better than never." Rachel welcomed them in. She was no longer alone. Her home had become a space of testimony, an archive of memory. That night, Emily hugged her mother. "I didn't cry in court, but I cried inside." Rachel didn't reply. She just held her tight, because sometimes words aren't enough, but a single embrace can say more than 1,000. The town could no longer maintain its old silence. Emily's voice had been played in court. Rachel's words were echoed in news bulletins. But the true sound of change was starting on the streets. Each day, another person who had once stayed quiet began to speak, and those voices were beginning to form a movement. As Rachel sipped her morning coffee, a new email notification popped up. Subject: Approval for Community Awareness. March. Applicant: Eldridge Hills Family Initiative. As she read the email, her eyes welled with tears. She was no longer alone, and the resistance finally had a name. That week, a banner appeared in front of the school. "If we can't protect our children, we cannot teach them." The person who hung it up was the elderly math teacher, someone who had long kept a polite but distant stance toward Rachel. "I stayed silent too," he said. "But if I stay silent now, everything we call education comes hollow." To Rachel, it wasn't just an apology, it was an act. and that act began to break the chains. A petition was drafted, title, Mandatory Psychological Screening and Camera Systems for School Transportation Safety. On the first day, 72 signatures. The second, 140. By the third, 1/3 of the town had signed. Rachel filed the signatures one by one. Emily watched from the side. "Do you think this will be enough?" she asked. Rachel smiled. "You don't always need the whole world to change something. Sometimes, all it takes is enough brave hearts." The day of the march arrived. The streets were filled with children holding small hand-drawn signs. "If I was quiet, please try to understand me." When a child is afraid and a society is silent, the greatest crime is committed. My voice was small, but my truth was huge. Rachel held Emily's hand during the march. Beside them walked neighbors who had spoken up for the first time, children showing their drawings, and even former students who had come back to offer support. Some cried. Some walked in silence. But this silence was no longer the silence of suppression. It was the silence of respect, of emotion, of unity. That same day, local television covered the march live. Rachel took the microphone briefly to make a statement. This march is not just about confronting the past. It's a step forward, so that no child in the future feels alone again. We are mothers, we are fathers, we are siblings. But most of all, we are a community that's learning to listen. That evening, at home, Emily wrote a short note in her notebook. She handed it to her mother. "I didn't draw today," it read, "because today, everyone saw how I felt." Rachel couldn't hold back her tears, because that was the greatest healing of all. Children no longer needed to draw their pain. They could live their truth and be seen. The day of the trial arrived, and Eldridge Hills was quieter than ever. But this silence wasn't born of fear. It was the stillness of anticipation. Because today wasn't just the trial of a single man. It was the day a community had to look itself in the mirror. Outside the courthouse, there were reporters, supporters, and opposers. But more importantly than all of them, there was something no longer deniable. The truth. When Rachel and Emily entered through the courtroom doors, people they'd never met before stood and applauded. Women, fathers, teenagers, the elderly, they all wore the same expression. "We didn't hear you before, but now we see you." Silence reigned as the judge entered. Files were placed on the desk. Mr. Grayson stood at the defendant's bench. This time, his face wasn't blank. It was tense, calculated. The prosecutor took the floor. "We have 6 separate families with nearly identical testimonies, audio recordings, and video evidence. The plaintiff does not stand alone. This is the result of a systematic manipulation. There may be no physical violence, but let's not forget that instilling fear is violence too." The defense attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client has served this town for 24 years. These testimonies are subjective interpretations. No direct threats, no physical harm, and no illegal acts have occurred." Rachel felt something inside her snap. How could it be legal for a child to grow up believing that, if I don't stay quiet, something bad will happen to me? The judge granted Rachel permission to speak. She stood, faced the courtroom. Every pair of eyes locked onto her. "I speak here today as a mother," she began. "Laws are written in words, but children don't live in words. They live in fears. And the language of fear is the color of silence." Her voice did not tremble. This court is not just judging one man, it is judging the silence that echoed through school hallways for years. The unseen children looking out bus windows never truly noticed. This trial is about them. The courtroom fell into deep silence, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. The jury was excused to deliberate. Rachel and Emily stepped outside. Journalists extended microphones. Emily squeezed her mother's hand and whispered, "My mom said everything. I just want to be like her." Rachel knelt down. "Don't be like me, sweetheart. Be the child who changes the world with her own voice." An hour later, the jury returned. The room filled again. The judge opened the file, and the verdict was read aloud. The defendant, Mr. Grayson, is found guilty of psychological manipulation and intentionally instilling fear in children. The court deems emotional safety to be as vital as physical safety. There was a ripple through the room. Some wept, some applauded, some simply sat in silence. But everyone knew nothing would ever be the same. As Rachel exited the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. "What do you think this case has changed?" one asked. Rachel answered, "Justice is not just about verdicts. Sometimes, it's about turning a child's sketch into words and a mother's whisper into a roar." After the court ruling was announced, Rachel returned home for the first time, not knowing what to do. The couches were the same, the table was the same, even the mug in the kitchen was right where she left it. But nothing felt the same. Now the walls didn't echo silence. They echoed what had been spoken. The soft sound of music coming from Emily's room signaled something new to Rachel. A moment where a little girl was beginning to reconnect with life. That week, Rachel's mailbox overflowed with letters. Some carried only a single sentence. "Thank you. I'm more aware now. I had my first open talk with my son. I'm not afraid anymore." But one letter struck Rachel deeply. It was handwritten, clearly by a child. "I couldn't talk like Emily, but I started drawing like her, because something was inside me, and because of her." It finally came out. Rachel pasted that letter into her notebook. Below it, she wrote a single word: healing. Emily now put her own hair clips in each morning. She picked her own clothes, slung her bag over her shoulder. One morning, Rachel turned to her and said, "I can drive you if you'd like." Emily smiled. "No, I think I can take the bus again." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure? The new driver is really sweet, and looking out the window is nice." That sentence wasn't small, because when a child can look out the window without fear, the world becomes just a little more livable. That summer, a special event was held at the town's central library. Its name, Silent Lines, the unheard through the eyes of children. Selected drawings from Emily's old sketchbook were displayed alongside testimonies from other children. Beneath each drawing was the same note. Not a wound, but a mark, and it should not be forgotten. Rachel walked through the exhibit, eyes brimming. An elderly woman approached her and said, "I worked at the first school where Grayson taught. We all knew what he was, but we stayed quiet. When you spoke up, we finally found the courage to hear. It's late, but now we're leaving a mark." Rachel could only nod, because some apologies don't come in words. They come in actions. That summer, Emily wrote a story, not about what she'd been through, but about a town she imagined, a town where children spoke, adults listened, and fear wasn't darkness. It was a way of learning. The story's title was The Bus with the Window Always Open. When Rachel read the story, she paused at one sentence. This bus only goes forward, because the children inside choose not to go back. And in that moment, Rachel understood. Emily was looking ahead now, and this story wasn't just about pain, it was about healing. In the fall, Rachel and Emily sat outside their house as the new school bus rolled quietly through the streets of Eldridge Hills. A child waved from the window. Emily waved back. Rachel did too, and in that moment, everything turned into a single sentence. Truth doesn't only hurt, sometimes it heals.